as you guys know, it's really, really valuable to have deep work and uninterrupted blocks of work. And what I found in my former work schedule was that I try to have an open door policy where people can come in and ask me any questions, but oftentimes that's at the expense of productivity. And so it was just really easy to fall into that trap of taking meetings, taking conversations, and things of that nature. But since we've moved to this system, what I found to be really helpful is we now have to request meetings. Now you have to say, hey, this is what the meeting's for, and you have to estimate the time, right? So there's a filter mechanism for which meetings can be requested, and that's both internal and external. So that's been really helpful because it's allowed me to block off focus, deep work time where I know that there's not going to be any physical interruptions.
You're listening to the eCommerce Influence Podcast with Austin Bronner and Andrew Foxwell. If you want honest, transparent, and tangible results that deliver lasting value and revenue, this is your podcast.
It's safe to say that most of us have been doing a lot more shopping online lately. And if you're an e-commerce brand, that means you might be seeing more first-time customers. Once they've made that first purchase, how do you keep them coming back? That's what Klaviyo is for. Klaviyo is the ultimate marketing platform for e-commerce brands. Klaviyo gives you the tools to build your contact list, to send memorable emails, automate those key messages, and more. A lot more. That's why more than 40,000 e-commerce brands like Chubbies, 8 Sleep, and Living Proof, including most of my clients, use Klaviyo to build a loyal following. Strong customer relationships mean more repeat sales, enthusiastic word of mouth, and less depending on expensive third-party ads. Whether you're launching a new business or taking your brand to the next level, Klaviyo can help you get growing faster. Plus, it's free to get started. Just visit klaviyo.com/influence to create your free account today. That's klaviyo.com/influence. As an e-commerce entrepreneur, you shouldn't expect to be the best at everything, and you probably don't have time to learn to be the best. So when your email isn't performing like you think it should, and you don't have time to manage it yourself, who should you call? When that happens to my clients, I call Sully at Ecom Growers. They've helped 2 of our clients double their email revenue in 30 days. Ecom Growers was co-founded by a successful Shopify store owner-operator, Tyler Sully Sullivan. You may remember Sully from previous episodes of this show, his posts in Shopify Facebook groups, or his own 7-figure store, Bomb Tech Golf. If you want to see how much more revenue you could be driving with email, go to ecomgrowers.com to apply for your free email blueprint. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the eCommerce Influence Podcast. My name's Austin Bronner, and I am excited to bring an episode to you today with a long-term client and friend. His name is Kevin Chen. He is a return guest. He came on the podcast in February 2019. And at that time, his business, iRestore, had just hit 8 figures. And they'd really cracked the code on paid social. Now, a year and a half later, his role has changed dramatically and the business has grown. And today, during our conversation, we are going to dive into what it means to build an organization, how to do it, how his roles changed from head of growth to CEO and executive leader in his company. He talks about working with agencies. He talks about mindset and recruiting. He talks about product launches and how integral they have been to leveling up in the business. He talks about big inflection points and thinking more strategic. So really good episode. I think you guys are going to really get a lot out of it. We go into a little bit tactical and also pull back and talk about what it means to be an executive and some of the things you should be thinking about. So if you are an e-commerce entrepreneur and you are really in the growth phase, this episode is going to be for you. So let's welcome him to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Austin. Thanks for having me back to my favorite e-commerce podcast.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, it's I appreciate that. It's fun having you back. It's fun having you come on here and chat because we get to chat quite often. And I always find that our conversations, I learn a lot from. It's fun to bring it kind of full circle and be able to share one of our conversations with everybody listening. Just to kind of catch up from last time. You came on the podcast, I think it was in February 2019, and shared where you were at in your guys' journey, which has been a journey of fast growth for you guys. And since then, a lot's changed. I'd love to hear kind of your update. So over the last, year, how have you guys been? What's been going on for you? And maybe give people a little bit of brief overview of the business and what's been happening over the last year.
Yeah, I'm happy to dive in. First of all, I'd like to start just to remind people, and for those that aren't familiar, what we do and who we are. So we are iRestore. We're a direct-to-consumer beauty brand, primarily focused on selling through Amazon and our own Shopify channel. We have a mission of really scaling this thing to 1 million customers and 100 million in revenue in the next 3 years. Our products are mainly focused on hair loss right now, with the flagship being a hero product that's a FDA-cleared laser device for hair loss. So our goal is really expand beyond that, get into the broader market of hair regrowth and hair regeneration, and then go past that. So I know a year and a half ago now, almost, when we talked, it was quite a different conversation that we had. For me personally, it was one where I was more in the weeds. I was more focused on growth. I believe our conversation centered around Facebook ads quite a bit.
For sure. It was Facebook. Yeah. That you guys had flicked the switch on Facebook and had been really starting to scale things up.
Yeah. Just like everyone else, we were very dependent on Facebook, and still am dependent, but that was the center of our conversations. It was, who do we hire for Facebook ads? Do we do agency? Do we do in-house? What are the things that I should be working on in Facebook ads? And since then, it's been quite a transition, I would say, for both myself and the company. In terms of the company, really, it's been a great growth path. As you mentioned, we're on this amazing trajectory, which fortunately for us, based on COVID and what had happened, has actually accelerated that path. We'd actually experienced over 100% year over year in Q2, which is, of course, quite phenomenal. We've gone through a lot of different process changes and workflow improvements within the company to really build the right foundation to help us scale. A year and a half ago, we were really thinking more, what's the next marketing initiative? What are the advertising things we need to work on, and things of that nature? And those are still happening. We did have an incredibly successful product launch since last year. So we talked in February. In June, we had an amazing product launch. We launched our new hero product, the iRestore Professional, which is a more premium device to our original iRestore Essential. And that fundamentally changed the economics of our business, which I can't understate the importance of that. Really helped us maintain the same CPA and go from there to almost double the ROAS overnight, essentially. So
that was from the product launch. Really, it was like you guys launched the product, and that the impact of that product launch was pretty darn quick, wasn't it?
So we had an amazing product launch right off the bat, but it was one of those things where, you had that huge spike, but it leveled out at places far beyond what we had before. So it fundamentally changed the economics of our business from acquisition, from profitability standpoint. And, I really had no idea what to expect when we first launched it. And I think we were having conversations about, not being able to do all the things we wanted to do, kind of up against a deadline and things like that. But looking back, it's great to see how we were able to put it together last minute, as it always kind of is with these things, and really scale the advertising and scale the growth of that product. And since then, we weren't sure people would want a higher end product versus the original, but we found that that's actually the more attractive option. And it's fundamentally changed everything in our business. So we can continue to reinvest that back into our growth.
It's really crazy when you see, you have inflection points like that. It's very interesting because often, people will see a high growth business and they'll think, oh, it just continues to go up and up and up. But often it's not that way, right? It's ups and downs or ups and plateaus. And that product launch, I think that was about 1 year ago when you guys launched the product, right? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And that created kind of a new inflection point for you guys. What did you learn from the product launch that you have taken forward with you as you look at new product development in the future?
Well, first, it validated the approach that we had was correct. it's been a while since we had a product launch, and definitely one of that magnitude was the first of its kind. So understanding that that method works and that we have the proper system as a foundation to launch future products, it was quite reassuring. And I think the product launch is one of those, important but also very time consuming things that you often can put aside in a business. But when you start to take a more long-term view and you realize, looking back at these inflection points, which oftentimes are not clear until you look backwards, that you want to seek out more of these opportunities. You want to seek out more of these highly leveraged opportunities in your business where you can make those paradigm shifts almost in the business and fundamentally change the economics. So for me, it helps me really take a step back and zoom out and look at our business and say, hey, what are some of those things that are going to help us make leaps ahead instead of a couple steps ahead? And how do I find more of those opportunities, whether that's another product of this nature, whether that's going to a different market, or maybe it's something else, but constantly asking myself to step back and identify these things. That's what it's done for us. Is it's allowed me to really understand the value and impact of these initiatives. But more importantly, with the change math and the economics of our business, it's really allowed us to explore different things. It's allowed us to bring in more talent. It's allowed us to really just expand beyond what we're able to do.
Sure. No, it 100% has seen, I mean, a lot of your growth that you've talked about over the last year has come after that, right? And the actual like building of the organization and filling it out. When you were on here talking about a year and a half ago, the team was still quite small. And again, it's, you guys are still a tight team, but there's been some changes since that product launch and since you guys like changed the fundamental underlying unit economics of the business that allowed you to be able to spend more, allowed you to be able to hire more and build out and get you to the point where you're able to step back. And that's one of the things I've noticed from working with you. It's when you take the next step to the next level, you then go all in and figure out how to do the best job at that level. What does your role look like now versus, a year and a half ago when you were back on the podcast?
Yeah, a year and a half ago, I was definitely a lot more in the weeds and frankly, still doing some of the day-to-day, which at that stage, even for our growth at that stage, it was not the most leveraged thing for me to be doing. And I think at that time, I didn't have enough foresight, or I was working too much in the business to realize a lot of these things. So, at the time working on advertising, acquisition, all those things seemed like the driver for the business. If I can just squeeze more ROAS out of Facebook, if I could just launch another initiative here. But since then, it's been the last year or so, I really had to realize that my number one skill set just couldn't be acquisition. I couldn't be chasing growth hacks, and I couldn't be the guy that kept up to date with all the updates in the acquisition world and Facebook ads and things like that. And really pivoted my role quite a bit in the last year, particularly the last half a year, to focus more on team building and recruiting. I realized that there was only really two skills I needed to have to help us succeed. Number one was to recruit, and number two was to bring in new ideas for the team that I've recruited. And so I really pivoted there, as you know, in the last 6 months or so, and really built out a process that we're continuing to refine. So that's my focus now. In addition to that, also just thinking further ahead, instead of looking at the next quarter, really looking ahead the next 3 years. Where do we need to be? What does the company need to look like? What does this market look like in the next 3 years? And how do we build a team that helps us get there? So it's really a lot more of that bigger picture stuff that I think about more.
Sure. And it was an interesting transition because you're really good at the growth stuff.
I hope so.
No, but really, like that's one of the things it's interesting kind of in watching your transition here, because it seemed like it was more challenging because it was one of the things that you're good at and like to do. I feel like a lot of people fall into that role where the business grows following the founder's strengths. And then at a certain point, it's like, well, now you become the bottleneck in the business to a certain extent because there's so many other things that that you have to do. And it's interesting because, you talked a little bit about your guys' growth through COVID and how you guys are up 100% year over year, but you faced some serious challenges during that time. What's something that you learned during the last 6 months around like supply chain management during this time of COVID growth?
I think I speak for a lot of people when I say during March, it was quite turbulent. So I remember there was a 2-week period in March when the business was tanking, and I think business fell to about 40 to 50%, which is obviously quite a nightmare. So having gone from that to April, fortunately for a lot of different markets, when things started to stabilize a little bit and the sentiment sort of calmed for COVID, we're able to experience a lot of growth. So through this process, I actually thought it was a net positive for me personally in the business in a lot of ways. Beyond just the revenue growth, it really challenged the way that we did things. And, we have everyone here in the office for the most part. And having access to people in the office, being able to walk over and talk to someone, I realized was maybe not the best setup. And through COVID, it made me challenge that, maybe challenge the way that we communicate and work. So there's definitely a lot of scrambling to make sure that we set everyone in the company up for success in terms of their work environment and workflow communications. So it was good in the sense that we really dived in and figured out, okay, here's how we need to work now, given the circumstances. And that involves a lot of, obviously, Zoom, Slack, more long form writing, more of these Loom recordings that you can do in short snippets. And I found that to be a lot more productive to create that space for people to work on their own. So those are some of the things that we learned from COVID. And obviously on the supply chain and demand, it was quite a nightmare going from supply chain being down in February because of what happened in China to the demand side tanking. And
then spiking.
And then spiking. Yeah, it was a total roller coaster of a ride. But definitely ended up positive for us at the end. So I'm really glad that happened. And the other thing I'll mention too is that COVID's really opened up the door for a lot of talent to be available on the market, which, we didn't realize at the time. But fortunately, we had aligned our recruiting schedule with COVID, just happened to be around the same time. And what we realized was that we were able to bring a lot of great people. I mean, even the number of applications was a lot more per position than what we had before. And definitely the caliber of people, I think, is improved as well. So that's a huge benefit for anyone that's, really thinking long term and has the budget to do so. It's a great time to be setting yourself up for success in the long term. And that's why we realized and why we pivoted towards that.
Sure. I'd like to dive in a little bit more on what you're talking about, remote versus in person work and what's changed and what's shifted and what you've learned there. Because for a while, you had a couple of years where it was pretty much everybody was in the office every day. And then it shifted over and COVID came, and obviously that made it a lot of changes for everybody. And the remote work was forced upon pretty much everybody. As you look, going forward, what's your plan, and how are you going to think about remote versus, bringing people in versus a combination? What are some of the things that you're taking away, and how are you thinking about that for your business going forward?
Mm-hmm. We can start with what the optimal setup is right now. So for us, the optimal setup that we envision is sort of one that's hybrid between, having people come in the office periodically. So that can be once a week, or maybe it's a more extended period of a week or 2 weeks per quarter. I think that's going to be the ideal setup for us. The reason is, I really am for the remote work, and we've been forced to do that. And I see the value of it, to have that space to not have the default setting of walking into someone's office or tapping them on the shoulders. I see the merits of that. But I can also see the other side of the coin where you really lose that human touch. You don't have the water cooler chats where
Sure.
people bump into each other. It's hard to replace the in-person communications that can take place sometimes, both from the camaraderie that it builds as well as the efficiency that you can accomplish. Although I don't think that needs to happen that often. And so for us, really thinking through the pros and cons of remote work, we think that the thing that makes most sense for us is to make sure that any director role or higher management roles are actually able to come in more frequently, because I think that if you have the core team here, so your director circle, and we're in California, it allows you to really meet when you need to, but also have that space. But more importantly, I think culture is really difficult to indoctrinate and ingrain with a remote team that's 100% remote. And so having the senior team really close by and be able to have them be your ambassadors, your coaches that help to train the rest of the team, that's sort of how I envisioned our team after all of this settles, whenever that is.
Sure.
But just being able to have that core team tight. And I think from a founder's perspective, it really helps to improve retention as well if you're able to have your core team close by. And so in terms of other roles, more specialist roles or maybe middle management and down, we're a little bit more flexible there in terms of where people work, because at the end of the day, there is a lot of talent available everywhere, not just states, but also overseas. So really limiting ourselves to the immediate zip code is quite restricting. So that's kind of how we've shifted the way we think about remote versus in office.
How has it impacted your personal workflow? Because I know one of the things that when we first started working together, one of the things you brought up was just not having a lot of time, like consistent time to be able to work on things. Or always felt like it was like short blocks. How has going remote helped you or impacted your personal work day in life?
Going remote has been quite helpful, to be honest, with my own workflow, because as you guys know, it's really, really valuable to have deep work and uninterrupted blocks of work. And what I found in my former work schedule was that I try to have an open door policy where people can come in and ask me any questions, but oftentimes that's at the expense of productivity. And so it was just really easy to fall into that trap of taking meetings, taking conversations, and things of that nature. But since we've moved to this system, what I found to be really helpful is we now have to request meetings. Now you have to say, hey, this is what the meeting's for, and you have to estimate the time, right? So there's the filter mechanism for which meetings can be requested, and that's both internal and external. So that's been really helpful because it's allowed me to block off focus deep work time where I know that there's not going to be any physical interruptions. And so that's been incredibly helpful for me personally. And I found that since COVID, I've actually been a lot more productive. And the other benefit too that I've noticed in terms of our own workflow and how we communicate is that through Zoom and these sort of things, everything's recorded. So you don't really have chats here and there where people are missing things or they're not able to follow up because everything's recorded. So that's a huge benefit, I think, of all of this.
I mean, we have a remote team. I think one of the biggest challenges has been what you're talking about earlier, which was the onboarding, kind of the getting together, like culture building is challenging, especially right now, because typically every 90 days we would, no matter where people are, we get together and everyone flies in and we have an offsite, and that's just hard to do right now. You can't, it's not something we've been doing. And that's been one of the biggest downsides. But, I think it's interesting how being forced into remote work so quickly, it's made businesses more durable in the future, right? Because if you can do both, as we've seen, businesses who've innovated the most are the ones that could very quickly shift to be able to work remote. So kudos to you guys for making that shift. And it was something that also you talked about even before a little bit, like thinking about making that shift, and then it happened for you. What does your team look like now?
So my team right now is still actually fairly lean. So everything's pretty much done in-house. We have a pretty lean marketing team of 5, which I myself is still leading at this point, and which I'm actively trying to get myself out of, fire myself from the job, if you will, and really looking for someone to come in and help head the marketing as the head of growth. But on the operations side, we have our own warehouse who still come in. Actually, of course, we need to be shipping out products. And then we just brought on a new director of operations as well, which will also manage the fulfillment, logistics, customer experience side of things. So all in all, our team is still pretty lean. We got 20 people here, and we really have a lot of vacant roles that we're really trying to fill in the next 6 months with building out the marketing team. I sort of see us as a marketing focused company. And so the priority for recruiting and building the team has been on that side of things. With a lot of the roles we're really trying to bring in, the way that we've set up the team right now on the marketing side is we have a lot of agency support. And so beyond the initial 20 people I mentioned for the in-house team, there's quite a large external team that supports us, from PR and social agency to web and CRO to paid social. There's just a bunch of agencies that we work with. So that's the team. That's what the team looks like now. But I see that changing, evolving quite a bit over the next 6 months.
Sure. Well, speaking of agencies, I think this is a great conversation to have, because a lot of business owners are working with agencies in some form or some context, and it can be challenging. Every week or every other week, I have a call with a client where we talk about agencies, whether hiring or firing an agency. What's one piece of advice you want to give to someone who is thinking about hiring an agency, or is working with an agency currently and might not be totally satisfied from your experience working with agencies?
Yeah, this is a fun conversation. I have this very often. Where I like to start is, I think for business owners, really start with what your core competencies need to be for the business. That's where I like to start. And for those roles, my personal belief is that those need to be in-house eventually. And so kind of planning ahead, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't hire agencies, but in my opinion, you do want to hire agencies with the idea of bringing those in-house. So that's where I start, is really identifying those. So for example, for us, we think we really need to be good at Amazon, right? So that's stuff that we want to bring in-house and build a core competency here. We may have had other agencies to start, but over time we transition in-house. In terms of agencies, the one thing that I always say is, if you're going to work with an agency, make sure the guy that you're talking to on the phone that's selling you is the guy that's working on your account, or at least very close to the guy working on your account. Because what I found is a lot of times agency founders tend to be really good content marketers, very good salesmen, but they can hand you off to someone that's maybe a little bit more junior, that doesn't have the capacity to do certain things. So that's one thing that I always look for. The other thing is, I almost never hire agencies unless they're coming through a strong referral from someone I trust. And that's really important, because it's just so difficult to tell whether someone is good and can do what they say just by looking at a proposal or their website. So those are the things that I really think about. In terms of agencies and the type of things that they're working on, I really think that as a business owner, you have to spend the tiny bit of time to just understand the basics of it. You just can't be handing off things that you don't understand. So, I think going from 0 to 1 is really easy in any area of marketing, just having an understanding of the core basics. So that's what I would say, is really know, the saying is, you want to know enough to be able to fire them. And so that's my philosophy as well in terms of hiring agencies.
People have different ideas about how agencies should interact with the business. I like the idea of, figuring out your core competency and actually diving into that and writing it out and knowing what your business is before making any decisions about who you're going to hire. I think what you're saying about being a marketing company that sells products, and you didn't say it exactly like that, but that's kind of how I interpreted it. I think that's a really powerful and very common thing that e-commerce businesses are. If you break it down, marketing is the biggest function, and and slowly bringing that in-house is really important. Obviously, paid social has been a big part of your guys' growth. Were you the first person to start that initiative? And how has that evolved and changed over time?
I was definitely the main person driving paid social for a long time. We've gone through a couple agencies, actually. So when we first started, we had an agency, and that's how I learned, is really looking over their shoulders. From there, we transitioned to another agency. And then at some point we transitioned in-house, and then we transitioned back to external. So there were definitely a lot of people that we went through for the paid social role. And how I think about that now is, it's one of those things that is our core competency and we need to build around. But at the same time, I really had to evaluate the current priorities in the business. So with the way that we're growing and sort of the direction that we're headed in the more recent months, I've realized that it does take time to bring this in-house. It does take time to build out and hire the creative team, the copywriter, and things like that. So I'd actually gone back to the agency route, even though we have sort of a hybrid setup with a in-house person as well. So we're kind of somewhere in between right now. But I really see this as a core competency for us and most e-com businesses that we would eventually want to bring back in-house. But it just comes down to priorities and the trade-offs that we have to make. And I've consciously made the decision of opting with the agency route again, knowing that it does come at the expense of certain things. But my eyes are set on larger things and the more bigger picture things right now. So taking my foot off the pedal for a little bit.
Sure. And you talked about those big leverage points, right? The big things that can move the business forward. And it can be really tough when you're in the position of every day, just spending hours in Facebook ads manager trying to keep demand up, right? It's hard to get a bigger picture view until you're able to get some help and step back. How is taking a step back a little bit further and thinking about the business? How has building iRestore been different than you imagined?
I really didn't have a lot of expectations when we first started. I think that I just fell in love with marketing, and that's what I really enjoyed about growing a business and growing a DTC brand. That's really what I enjoyed. It was me and the computer, 15 hours a day in the beginning. But as we've transitioned and I've grown as a person and as a leader, what I've found to really drive me and motivate me now is the idea that I can sign on to work and I can think about the team. I can think about how to make their experiences better. I can think about who we want to bring on the team and the future that we want to build together. So it certainly wasn't so big picture and forward looking when I first started. We really thought of myself more as a marketer, but today really thinking more as a visionary and a leader. And that's the top priority now is, how do we bring on the best people and how do we keep them happy? How do we create a great culture? How do we recognize their success? How do we help them grow as a person? So during their time here with us, they're able to look back at it one day and really cherish that memory and experience that really helped them get to wherever they will end up. So, those were the things I expected when we first started, certainly not a few years ago. And that's how I've sort of changed my mindset in terms of the last year or two and where my focus and my fulfillment has come from now. So I would say it's a very positive change, and it certainly instilled a lot of good personal growth myself, helping me mature as a person, both in and outside of work.
Sure. No, I've seen it for sure. I'm talking to you over the last couple of years. Is there anything you can share specifically? It's been helpful when you're thinking about creating a better work environment for people and creating a better environment for success on your team.
Mm-hmm. When we first started the ideas, it was before COVID. So there are quite a few things that we can no longer implement, at least in the near future. Some of those things are just building in more benefits for the team, such as gym membership. We are really promoting learning for the team. So giving them credits for learning, Audible, books, really want to drive people's success. And as we've grown the company with the product launch and our profits increasing and things like that, we thought about different ways of giving back to the team as well in setting up a maternity leave program and paternity leave, just really thinking through how can we make everyone's experience better in this company. But since COVID, of course, that's changed quite a bit and we weren't able to do as much. It's just really unfortunate what's happened. But some of the things that we think about now is just, sending gifts to the team and giving them DoorDash or Postmates credit. It's actually quite a challenge that I have to admit in terms of building culture and in this environment. And, there's really no end in sight. That's the worst part. So I'm actually looking for ideas myself from others in terms of how we can really better everyone's experience given the circumstances and how how everyone's just stuck at home and not able to have FaceTime. I think it's really hard to manufacture that over Zoom when people are talking over each other, or you have like 30 people on Zoom. It just doesn't really work. So I don't have a great answer there.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a challenge. Even the small, some of the perks that I really enjoy. This is simple, but when I would, before COVID, working from home, one of my favorite parts of the day was I would leave my house and go work from a coffee shop for a little while, which I think a lot of people who work from home, like a home office, enjoy. And nope, that's no longer. Again, it's a very small concession, but it's interesting when those things kind of stack up, like being able to go to the gym, all those different things. Home. One of the things I've been, home gym, stuff like that, I think are all good ways to potentially make the work from home experience a little bit better, right? Supporting in that way. If you can buy kettlebells or if you can buy weights, I've been trying to buy kettlebells for months. I'd love to dive in a little bit more to, your journey at iRestore. You guys have grown incredibly fast, right? And you guys are an incredible success story. But internally, obviously, you're dealing with it every single day. And there's ups and there's downs. What's been the most challenging part of building iRestore?
I think the most challenging part and the most rewarding part is the people. At the end of the day, we are a group of people that are working towards the same mission, and dealing with all aspects of that, from recruiting to training and onboarding to keeping people happy to, unfortunately, sometimes people leaving. I would say that's the most challenging part about building a company, but also the most critical piece in your success. I myself am a little bit less experienced in terms of hiring and managing, and there's a lot of challenges that you really have to learn trying to be a young leader in an organization that's growing quickly. You have to constantly innovate and reinvent yourself. The saying is, what got you here is not going to get you there, right? It's cliche, but it's totally true. And constantly changing who I need to be and what I need to work on is difficult. It's not just about what I'd like to do, which is a lot of the growth and marketing stuff. It's about what I need to do. And that oftentimes can change very quickly if your business is growing quickly. So trying to keep up with that and constantly evaluate the trade-offs I have to make, what we talked about with letting go of growth and letting go of trying to scale Facebook ads for a minute, just so I can go focus on things that may not grow us in the immediate future, but will grow us in the more long term when we kind of step back and take a look at the 3 to 5 year picture. So constantly shifting gears, becoming the designer of the system, then jumping in, becoming the operator of the system, stepping back out, constantly doing that change. I think it's quite challenging, but it's also very rewarding, especially the team building aspects. So I would say that's
I would say that's something you're incredibly good at, and not many people that I work with are able to transition as quickly and as thoroughly. It's one of the things I've seen. You got an ability to be able to like commit and move forward and change and become who you need to be at the next level as you guys continue to scale up. When looking back, what's something that you failed at during this period of growth at iRestore?
It's an interesting one. I think something that I've failed at in this process is that it's something that I'm continuing working on, but because we're going so fast, sometimes it can feel like you're going 120 miles per hour and the wheels are falling off and you're trying to hold on to everything and catch everything. And I think that oftentimes I haven't been transparent enough with the team in terms of some of the challenges I myself am going through personally. I try to put on this image of me being a tough guy that has everything figured out, that can just put in more hours and try to solve every problem. But more recently, I've definitely felt that was not a solution, and that I'm only human and there's only so much I can get done. And I only have so many hours, even if I work the weekends. So just being vulnerable and being able to be transparent with people and really being honest about my challenges that's something that I believe I can do a better job with in terms of communicating that, but also delegating some of that to other people and allow people, whether it's people on our team right now or people that we will bring on, to be able to understand where I am, where I failed, where my struggles are, and have them come in and help me and support me instead of thinking, I need to put on this cape and be Superman and handle everything myself.
I think that's great advice. It's not talked about enough, right? The power of being vulnerable and the power of being transparent, and the power that pushes out throughout the organization when people are on the same page and they understand that you're all working together and the success of the business is reliant on every single person. I find the same thing, that the more transparent and clear you can be about where the business is and how you're doing, especially going through, and everyone's gone through some crazy ups and downs through COVID, that transparency within that time has been a much more successful strategy, and one that empowers a lot of people. I think that's really, really good advice. What are you kind of curious about right now?
Well, something that really piques my interest now is the new economy and the new market that we're in now, where e-commerce adoption has accelerated so much and it's here to stay, right? So that's something that has me really intrigued and really has me thinking about the different opportunities that have been presented through this unfortunate time. So for me, I'm now turning my attention towards the future in terms of new product lines, both within our current niche as well as horizontally scaling to different verticals. That's really piqued my interest. Looking at the market in beauty and vanity, who knew? What a surprise, right? People would rather starve and pay for better appearance. We've seen the growth in the category. We've seen the growth in e-commerce. So for us, really looking ahead at the different sorts of opportunities that's presented by COVID and acceleration of e-commerce adoption, with all these retailers, going out of business or not having a good timeline on return. That's where I really am focusing a lot of my time on, is how can we create better, more effective products that people can use in the home, like we already do, and really make up for the void that's created by the inability to go to doctors, get surgeries, transplants, or all those things. That's really what's piqued my interest. And it's really quite an exciting time to do this. I know that people really don't have a lot of places to spend their disposable income now. So it's really a great place for us to spend more time on and, create something that people would want, especially during this time.
I love that focus. I mean, you talked about it earlier, how these inflection points often come with creation of a new product or a product launch. And I have seen it time and time again that, putting the time and effort into creating something like category changing or even just customer satisfying can make a huge, huge improvement. And you're right. A lot of the money that people spend on restaurants, that's a huge part of their disposable income, has been shifted to other places. And yeah, I just think I agree. I think it's one of the most interesting times to run an e-commerce business, and it's growing so fast. One question I'd like to, I've started asking a little bit more because I think it's super interesting, is the concept of freedom, right? And creating and building freedom. What does freedom mean to you?
Yeah. So I think the concept of like a lifestyle business versus, a business that's really looking to scale, is that sort of what you mean in terms of freedom?
For some people, freedom is traveling and being able to travel. And then that's one of the things that's been restricted during COVID. Or, for other people, freedom is a very different concept. I'd be interested to hear like how you think about freedom and what that means to you, and maybe how it's been impacted by COVID.
I think in the terms of the business, which, I'm so tied to and really think about quite a bit, is the freedom to choose our path and to have options of where we want to go with this company, whether it's that market expansion that we talked about or people that we bring on. That's really the freedom that comes to mind the most for me, given the physical limitations that we have now. But I'm really glad that we're able to at least thrive in this current phase of COVID, because it gives us the freedom to reinvest back into people, reinvest back into our employees. And for me, that's a type of freedom that's really freeing and fulfilling for me, because I've seen other business owners not in such fortunate positions. And I know that when you're in that state where your business is down 70%, there is no physical or mental freedom that you can accomplish. So, given the limitations that we have now, that's sort of the freedom that comes to mind when we talk about the concept of options and being able to choose your future, and the idea that we have the freedom to decide where we reinvest our money for the business and how that can decide where we are from an office standpoint or market standpoint. That's the sort of freedom that comes to mind, and really what we are fortunate to have, both on the personal and professional level.
For sure. And I saw that 40% of the businesses that had shut down that were listed on Yelp that had shut down for COVID are not going to reopen and have already closed. Last couple questions here. One of them is, what are some of the best resources that have helped you on your guys' growth path that you could share with the audience?
Yeah, this one, I always come back to what I talked about last time too, which is I truly think the best resource is your network. As a founder, as a business owner, one of the things that you can do that can help your business jump ahead is just talk to people, especially ones that are just a little bit ahead of you. Sometimes you don't really know who's going to be able to help you, and you don't need to have that expectation. But what I've found a lot of times when we talk about the concept of inflection points is that there's so many times when I look back at certain shifts in our business and myself personally, where I can attribute it back to a particular person I met and a particular event that I went to that really had a seismic shift in terms of my mindset, or perhaps it was an opportunity that we uncovered that I had never thought about before. So in terms of resources, I would say, other than the typical stuff that you can go to online or podcasts like this one, it really is, going out and networking and building those connections. And that starts by you really, going out there and making yourself available and delivering value to other people. And I've found that to be the best way to get resources, because you as a founder, you have a very unique position. You have a very unique voice that your employees are not able to replicate when they're at those events. And so that's one role that is extremely difficult to delegate. And frankly, I'm not sure it's one that you would delegate. So really double down on connections, double down on networking, even during this time. Hit people up on Zoom, use Facebook groups, attend virtual events. There are so many ways you can continue to build connections. And I found that to be the most impactful things I've done for the business in bringing in resources and new ideas, is just talk to people and build my network.
A little bit more challenging during COVID, but it's definitely possible. You can just make the phone calls because, people are send the emails and set the Zoom calls. Kevin, this has been awesome. I really appreciate it. One of the things that you guys are working on and are excited about is hiring. You mentioned a couple times. I want to talk a little bit about, maybe what you're hiring for and where some of the opportunities are, because you guys have such a cool, exciting company. And I know there's some people listening that might be interested in joining. Could you talk a little bit about what you're working on and, what you're maybe looking to hire for?
Mm-hmm. So when you experience 100% year over year growth, it presents a lot of opportunities, but it also presents a lot of challenges. So we have quite a few roles we're looking to fill really on the marketing end, anywhere from the head of growth marketing to a creative director to a content marketing manager. So really anyone that's working in marketing, we probably have a role for you. We're really looking to build up the team and scale with, initiatives like international expansion, with retail, with influencer partnerships, really top of mind for us, and really going out there to scale to the next level, both vertically within the current niche of hair regeneration, as well as making that jump to a different vertical in the next year. So our goal is really to get to that 1 million customer and 100 million annual revenue mark within the next 3 years. So we see ourselves as a company that's able to transform and disrupt the beauty industry in meaningful ways with our non-invasive and drug-free solutions. So if there's anyone out there, if you're listening and you want to be a part of this big challenge and this opportunity to tackle this beauty market, especially during this challenging time, we'd love to have you. We'd love to talk to you. You can email me at kevin@irestorelaser.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, and there's going to be a lot of opportunities, and I guarantee it's going to be very exciting.
Yeah, and I'll make a second pitch that Kevin is a great leader and somebody who has been continuing to step up and level up, and watching the company grow has been super, super exciting. So it's a great place to end up and work, and you will learn a ton.
Thanks, Austin. Thanks for having me on. It's always really good to catch up with you, and I'm really glad that we're able to have a follow-up since last time, because I think there's really been a lot of exciting things and personal and professional growth. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you being a part of that journey as well. You've been instrumental for me. So thank you.
All right, here we go. Well, it don't matter. You got money. You ain't got no soul.
Hey everyone, it's Austin with a special message for you today. On September 18th, we're going to be increasing the price of membership to the coalition. So if you've been thinking about joining my private coaching community for some time, now is the time to do it. On September 18th, we're going to increase the price. So if you join before that day, you'll be locked in at our current price and be grandfathered in for the future of your membership. That includes all current members. So if you're a member right now, your rate will not change. We're going to be increasing the price because we've been increasing the quality of membership. That means live trainings have improved, private coaching has improved, and we brought in a ton of incredible members, and we're trying to keep that group a quality elite group of entrepreneurs, of e-commerce entrepreneurs. So if you'd like to join, now's the time to do it. Head over to jointhecoalition.com. Again, that's www.jointhecoalition.com. Hope to see you inside.